Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Paranormal News. Tonight's article comes from DiscoverMagazine.com, and the headline is Real Life Vampires Exist, and Researchers Are Studying Them. They Walk Among Us. It was written by John Edgar Browning from the Georgia Institute of Technology, and it was published March 26, 2015. Vampires walk among us. But these people aren't the stuff of nightmares. Far from it, actually. Just sit down for a drink with one of them and ask for yourself. That's if you can find one. They aren't necessarily looking to be found. I've spent 5 years conducting ethnographic studies of the real vampires living in New Orleans and Buffalo. They are not easy to find, but when you do track them down, they can be quite friendly. Real vampires is the collective term by which these people are known. They're not real in the sense that they turn into bats and live forever, but many do sport fangs, and just as many live a primarily nocturnal existence. These are just some of the cultural markers real vampires adopt to express a shared and, according to them, biological essence. They need blood, human or animal, or psychic energy from donors in order to feel healthy. Becoming a vampire. Their self-described nature begins to manifest around or just after puberty. It derives, according to them, from the lack of subtle energies their bodies produce, energies other people take for granted. That's the general consensus anyway. It's a condition they claim to be unable to change, so they embrace it. The real vampire community, like the legendary figure it emulates, knows few national boundaries, from Russia and South Africa to England and the United States. Particularly in the internet age, vampires are often well attuned to community issues. This is more true for some than others, though. I found the vampires of Buffalo to be keen to keep up to date with the global community, while those in New Orleans were often more interested in the activities of their local vampire houses, an affiliated group of vampires, usually led by a vampire elder, who helps his or her house members to acclimate to their vampiric nature. The varied vampire community. Some houses, and indeed whole vampire communities, as in the case of New Orleans, will combine their efforts to organize charity events, like feeding, not feeding on, the homeless. However, despite their humanitarian efforts, real vampires don't go around advertising who they are, for fear of discrimination by people who simply don't understand them. Some semblance of the real vampire community has existed since at least the early to mid-1970s, but my own dealings began in 2009, when I entered the New Orleans community clinging to my digital voice recorder. I eventually met around 35 real vampires there, but the total number in New Orleans is easily double that. They ranged in age from 18 to 50, and represented both sexes equally. They practiced Sangerian blood and psychic feeding, taking energy, using for example the mind or hands. Blood is generally described by my study participants as tasting metallic or coppery, but can also be influenced by the donor's physiology, or even how well he or she is hydrated. Some psychic vampires use tantric feeding, that is through erotic or sexual encounters, while others use what could be described as astral feeding or feeding on another from afar, and others feed through emotion. Afterwards, blood-drinking and psychic vampires feel energized or otherwise better than they would if they were to sustain themselves on regular food alone, like fruits, fish, and vegetables, which they eat too. These vampires describe themselves as atheistic, monotheistic, or polytheistic. Some identified as heterosexual, some homosexual, and some bisexual. Some were married, some were divorced, and some were parents. Unquestionably, I found the vampires I met to be competent and generally outwardly normal citizens. They performed bloodletting rituals safely and only with willing donors, and participated regularly in medical exams that scarcely, if ever, indicated complications from their feeding practices. Outside mainstream culture, What was perhaps the most surprising about the vampires I met, though, was their marked lack of knowledge about vampires in popular culture. They seemed to know much less than you might expect, at least for vampires, about how their kind were depicted in books and films. By this I mean to say that the people I met with and interviewed hadn't turned to drinking blood or taking psychic energy simply because they had read too many Anne Rice novels. In fact, the real vampire community in general seems to have appropriated very few of the trappings mainstream culture attaches to creatures of the night. Many do dress in gothic clothes, but certainly not all the time, and very, very few sleep in coffins. In fact, those vampires who do dress a certain way or wear fangs do so long after realizing their desire to take blood. This is what might be called a defiant culture. Real vampires embrace their instinctual need to feed on blood or energy, and use what mainstream culture sees as a negative, deviant figure, like the vampire, to achieve a sense of self-empowerment. They identify others with a similar need and have produced a community from that need. But real vampires can also help us understand, and perhaps even shed some of the ideological baggage each of us carries. They show us how repressive and oppressive categories can lead to marginalization. Through them, we see the dark side of ourselves. More generally, this community shows that being different doesn't have to force you onto the margins of society. Real vampires can and do exist in both normal society and their own communities, and that's okay. And that is the end of this article. Now, this is an article that is a little bit older, but the reason I brought this to you is because me and Old Boy have talked about this many times on Staring into the Abyss. We did a couple different episodes of the show about real-life vampires. We did one on psychic vampires, and we did one on regular vampires that drank human blood. And I wanted to bring this to you to show that this is real stuff. This actually exists. Now, these aren't the vampires of lore and legend. They have a whole nother backstory. If you want to hear that, go to my video called What Are Demons and Where Do They Come From? It's an episode of Staring into the Abyss. And I give you the origin story of vampires, what they are, where they come from, all that. But this is a psychological condition in which these people believe that they need to feed on blood or feed on psychic energy. And it's a real thing, and it exists. And in today's culture, where everything seems to be okay, where we have no more judgments, no more hang-ups on anything, people can be whatever the hell they want to be just about. This is accepted as normal. I'm not saying it's not normal. Well, obviously it's not normal, but I'm not saying it's wrong. As long as nobody's getting hurt, without permission, then I'm cool. But this is what it is, the real life thing. So let me know down in the comment section what you guys think. As always, it's up to you to make up your own minds, and I will catch you on the next one. Until I speak to you again, love many, trust few, and do harm to none. God loves you, and so do I. Bye-bye.